Rogue One, directed expertly by Gareth Edwards, was a story that didn't need to be told. There's nothing in this film that moves a larger story arc of Star Wars forward. On the contrary, Star Wars stands very well on its own, without Rogue One having ever been released. So why do I like this film? Allow me to explain. Released for Christmas 2016, Rogue One was the second movie released in the Disney era of Star Wars, after The Force Awakens from a year before. More of a prequel to the original trilogy, Rogue One is set to happen immediately before the events of 1977's A New Hope. As this review is being filmed in 2022 and the Disney Trilogy has long since concluded, I can say that I believe Rogue One to be the best film released by Disney in the Star Wars universe. I like that Rogue One takes a look at some of the smaller players in the fight against the Empire. All of the main players in Rogue One are bit players in the grand scheme of the fight. We've never heard of Jyn Erso or Cassian Andor, who do all the work, while Mon Mothma and General Dodonna do all the talking. Jyn and Cassian make the contributions that allow General Dodonna to find the weakness in the Death Star from the plans delivered to him by Princess Leia. Jyn and Cassian aren't high-powered generals or war heroes. They are the everyman and the everywoman, regular people caught up in circumstances larger than themselves. The plot of Rogue One consists of the lead character, Jyn Erso, played by Felicity Jones, who sees her mother killed by the Empire while her father, Galen Erso, played by Mads Mikkelsen, is captured and forced to work on the Death Star designed by the director of Imperial Military Advanced Weapons Research, Orson Krennic, expertly played by Ben Mendelsohn. Jyn was hidden from Krennic by her parents and was later rescued from her hiding place and raised by Saw Gerrera. 16 years later, Jyn's father, Galen, was an engineer working on the planning and construction of the Death Star. Knowing that the Death Star would be used as a weapon for terror, Galen placed a deliberate flaw in the design of the Death Star so that it could be destroyed. Erso was able to get word of the flaw to his old friend Saw Gerrera. The rebels, needing to contact the elusive Saw Gerrera, located free Jyn Erso from a prison camp where she had been held due to her criminal activities after being raised by Saw Gerrera. The rebels have heard that there is an informant that has given information to Saw. The rebels recruit Jyn to help them contact Gerrera, which she reluctantly does, to obtain information about the Empire's new weapon. After meeting up with Saw again, Saw plays a message that Galen recorded for Jyn that details the defect in the Death Star plans. Jyn melts at seeing her father in a hologram after so many years. Meanwhile, Director Krennic, aware of the defector and the information he is spreading, orders the Death Star to fire on Jedha City to prove the readiness of the Death Star and to silence the defector that he knows is there. Jyn and the rebels narrowly escape the destruction and head to planet Edu, where Galen is stationed. The rebels, unknown to Jyn, have a plan to assassinate her father, Galen, on Edu. Shortly after they arrive, Galen is killed in an attack by a rebel X-Wing strike group that was sent as a backup plan when communication was lost with Jyn's group. Jyn and the rebels return to the main rebel base on Yavin 4. A council meeting is held about the situation with the Death Star. Unable to come to a consensus, the council opts to surrender to the new weapon. Jyn pleads with the council to have hope, but with her father's hologram detailing the weakness in the design destroyed, Jyn has no proof to show them. Jyn recruits a team of fighters to go with her to Scarif and steal the Death Star plans. The group lands on the secure planet by subterfuge and begins their scheme to steal the Death Star plans. Obviously, it's well known that Princess Leia obtains the plans and the events of A New Hope take place, so our heroes are successful. Rogue One is different from most Star Wars films. Not only does it focus on lower echelon members of the Rebel Alliance, it focuses on the war itself. In Rogue One, people die. Lots of them. Brutally and viciously. Not only do the enemy combatants die, but entire cities of people are razed. People that have nothing to do with the battle between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance and have no interest in that war die wholesale. Rogue One drives home the gritty, ugly, and vicious nature of war, and how that war affects not just the people fighting in it. Gareth Edwards attempts to bring the human toll of the war to light in Rogue One in a way that none of the other films focus on. The character development focuses mostly on Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor. I've seen a lot of reviews complaining about the lack of character development. The development for Jyn and Cassian is there, it just isn't spelled out. Most of it is implied or must be deduced. Reading between the lines, we can figure that Jyn led a troubled childhood due to seeing her mother killed and being abandoned by her father from a young age. When we catch up with Jyn again 16 years later, she's being rescued from a prison camp and has a long list of criminal convictions. She tells Cassian that she prefers to think of her father as dead, her anger suggesting abandonment issues towards her father Galen. During a firefight in the first act, Jyn sees a small child abandoned and alone in the middle of the fight. She risked her own life to save the child and return to her mother. Our first introduction with Cassian Andor has him meeting with a spy to obtain information. Cassian ends up murdering the spy by shooting him in the back to keep the information from falling into Imperial hands. You can read on Cassian's face that this wasn't the first time he's had to do some wet work. We aren't explicitly told a lot of the backstory of Jyn and Cassian, but it doesn't really matter. We have enough information to fill in those blanks well enough and arrive at a concept of those characters' motivations and desires, at least well enough to get the story told. Diego Luna stands out to me as an actor that completely knocked it out of the park. Diego Luna, right from the beginning of the film, shows a wide range of emotions. In his opening scenes, he met with an informant and pressed the guy for information, killed 2 stormtroopers that walked up on him, and then comforted the informant just before shooting him in the back. Immediately after shooting him, you can see that Luna's character didn't want to kill the guy, but it was necessary. Throughout the film, you come to see that Cassian Andor has done some probably terrible things in the name of the rebellion that he has to live with, and one can tell he still deals with some of those demons. Felicity Jones brought a determination to the character of Jyn Erso. Stalwart and eager to fight against the Empire, one can sense most emotion in Jones' character when dealing with the subject of her father. The tragedy of the character is that she was separated from her father as a child, and then only gets to speak with him again as an adult as he's dying. Jones plays the character pretty straight. Jyn Erso comes off as confident and defiant, but under that facade, she's quite vulnerable, as you see with her melting the 2 times she sees her father. She brought a nice subtle touch of humanity and a daddy's girl vulnerability to Jyn Erso, and I liked her interpretation of the character a lot. Ben Mendelsohn was great as director of Advanced Weapons Research, Orson Krennic. Arrogant and driven, he was the taskmaster in charge of the completion of the original Death Star, and was quite a political figure in Rogue One. Mendelsohn played Krennic as a director looking to advance his station within the Empire, going so far as to challenge Darth Vader. And as you might imagine, challenging a figure as imposing as Darth Vader would take a certain amount of sheer bravado as well as pure lunacy. And I felt Mendelsohn delivered his best performance to date as Krennic. I saw him again in Ready Player One as Sorrento, and I felt that character was simply an extension of Orson Krennic from Rogue One. Donnie Yen was a true pleasure to watch as Chirrut Imwe, a truly veteran actor in his own right. Yen's Imwe character impressed me as a warrior monk set in the Star Wars universe. The idea to make the character blind came from Yen, and Imwe appears to be Force-sensitive without stepping on the toes of the Jedi. Bringing quiet confidence and warm humor to the role, Yen was a pleasure to watch in this film. The standout character of the movie to me was Alan Tudyk, who played the role of K2SO. Tudyk is a veteran actor, and I enjoyed his work in A Knight's Tale, the Firefly series, and Serenity. Performing completely in a motion capture suit for the film, his performance was the most memorable of the entire cast, as well as a fan favorite. In fact, in order to properly portray the tall, lanky robot for the film, Alan wore 13-inch stilts for most of the shots and provided a lot of improv for the role. K2SO was, perhaps, one of the most developed characters in the movie, most likely because he doesn't have a complicated past. He's an Imperial robot that was captured and reprogrammed. As a result of the reprogramming, K2SO just says whatever comes into his circuits. That gives the writers the freedom to give K2SO some personality, and for Tudyk to give him humanity from his acting. K2SO certainly doesn't candy coat what he's got to say, unlike C-3PO, who must remain prim and proper as a protocol droid. It's an interesting look at a droid with some personality without a filter inhibiting what he might say. I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on the deepfake recreation of Governor Tarkin from Episode 4, A New Hope, originally acted by the great Peter Cushing. Cushing's estate blessed the use of his likeness for the film, while Guy Henry provided the motion capture for the role. The technology just wasn't there at the time the film was made. The likeness of Peter Cushing looks fantastic until that likeness is asked to move. It breaks the immersion of the film. I know they used the character of Governor Wilhulf Tarkin to help tie Rogue One back to A New Hope, but it just wasn't done right. CGI was again used to recreate a 19-year-old Carrie Fisher for the final shot of the film. Norwegian actress Ingvild Delia played the part of Princess Leia with motion capture dots on her face. These dots were then used to superimpose Carrie Fisher's face on Delia's. The result was, in my opinion, better than what was done with Peter Cushing. It was much closer to true life, but still noticeable. Thankfully, that shot was right at the end of the movie, so breaking the immersion was less costly than with Tarkin. I really enjoyed this entry into the Star Wars universe. It showed a different side of the fight against the Empire. Rather than focusing on the top echelon of the rebellion, Princess Leia, the soon-to-be Jedi Master Luke Skywalker, and the also soon-to-be General Han Solo, we're treated to a story of the little people, the normal people, the people that went out there, got things done, and didn't get to bask in the glory of a medal ceremony. People whose names would be largely forgotten if they weren't chiseled into a memorial wall somewhere. People who wouldn't be the stuff of legend, and whose stories wouldn't be told around campfires for generations. Songs won't be sung about the exploits of Cassian Andor or Jyn Erso, but it's these little people that contributed to the greater good of the war. Without their help, the Death Star plans might not have made it into the hands of the rebellion. I think this is a film that didn't need to be made. Star Wars as a story was quite complete without it. It was, however, a delightful story that I'm glad was told, and I think is the best thing to come out of Disney Star Wars aside from The Mandalorian. With a final act that I compare to Saving Private Ryan in some ways, I think it's definitely worth a watch for any Star Wars fan, and a good watch for anyone looking for an entertaining story to watch for 2 hours. And that's the rundown.